Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute, and with me is Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems.
What do you do when the prospect hesitates? When they start coming up with objections to the deal? Do you have a plan? Is there still a play to be made? And why did this have to happen? I thought it was all going so well, and now the deal is going down the drain, along with my hefty commission check. If this feels familiar to you, it's time to zone in as Scott and I discuss getting to a decision and other great ideas on episode 532 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
Great topic today. Looking forward to it. Bill, first we're going to do the book club, and I really love this chapter 16. I really introduced a lot of stuff. We're in part 4 of the book, How Clients Buy. And I know that we said we're going to cover 16 and 17, but I think Bill and I got into this chapter, and there's so much rich content that we decided to cover 16 today, and then we're going to cover 17 next week. And then I think we have a guest coming up on the episode after that.
Right.
Where we're going to talk about the theory of accountability.
Which is going to be our new book.
Yeah, which is, I'm looking forward to having Sam on the show. So to learn more, stay tuned.
Yep.
But chapter 16, the title, A Chain is as Strong as Its Weakest Link, Using the 7 Elements as a Diagnostic Tool. And the 7 elements are obviously the 7 steps we've been talking about throughout the book. But the chapter opens up with a very interesting kind of a philosophy about a recipe.
Yeah, I thought that really caught my attention.
Yeah, and I thought of it, and I've been thinking about this concept for a while. I don't know where I first was introduced to it. I mean, just get inundated with so much information. So It's tough to remember where the source of it is. But somebody was talking about a restaurant business and what makes a successful meal. Is it the ingredients, the produce, the vegetables, the meat? Is it the recipe? Is it the chef? I mean, there are so many contributors to success.
That's right. Yes is the answer, right?
Yeah.
The ambiance, the waiter, the time I had to wait.
Exactly. Yep. Oh, there's so many things. The whole experience.
Right.
There's so many ingredients to that experience. And then it talks about the 4 things of sales success. And here are the 4 things is, create a list of ingredients. Okay. That makes sense.
This was the recipe success, not the sales.
The recipe. Okay. Yeah. So first is create a list of ingredients. Second is follow the order to be combined. So in what sequence, syntax are we going to be following? And we've all seen recipes where you got to add this to this and then don't add that yet. And then we got to follow the order. Third is what the quantity of each ingredient is. Well, of course, duh. I mean, we can look at a side of a box on ingredients that's in the meal, but we don't know what quantity it is of each. So it's hard to duplicate it. And then lastly is the process to follow after the ingredients are combined. And what do you do with it? Do you mix, stir, bake, cook? I mean, what is it? And I was just very intrigued by that because we can follow that same concept in other areas of our life and go, what's the recipe like for this? What is the formula that we need to follow in order to determine or predict the outcome and to be able to measure it so that we can correct it if we're not getting the outcome that we want?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that we have to make sure that we have the right ingredients and we put them in together at the right quantity and how we combine them. And we're going to talk later about getting to a decision. And in the sales, it's all about the sales process. If you're not following a process, you're not getting the right questions answered and dealt with. So it really follows along and tracks very well with what we're going to talk about later.
Yeah. And I think in the sales process, and I learned this from Anthony Anarino when we had him on the show, is to really look at effectiveness, not efficiency. So effectiveness trumps efficiency. Too often, sales managers, people who manage a sales channel, go for efficiency and not effectiveness. And the sales process has to be effective. And following a system makes it a lot more effective.
That's right.
The chapter also brought up this very interesting concept of MECE, which stands for mutually exclusive, collective, exhaustive. Have you ever heard that term before, Bill?
No, I hadn't. I was interested in that. So explain what it means.
It was very common in business classes, and it is MECE. Each are separate from the other, and together they are both complete and necessary. And I thought, wow, isn't that profound? When we look at the sales process, we look at our recipe, we look at our formula. Yeah, there are steps that are independent, but together they complete the entire process. So think about that when you're following a sales process or a system at home.
Right. If we don't do something, it's going to come back to get us later. You have so many good questions around budget and process, and I think those are important. If we skip those, then later on they're going to something about budget or process is going to come and bite us because we didn't clear the decks of those issues or deal with them earlier. So that's what the sales process does for us. Gives us an organized way to do things. Now they have a sales process here. Awareness, understanding, interest, respect, trust, able, and then ready to buy. So how does he talk about in this chapter how we use this to, what does he say? Use it as a diagnostic tool. What's he mean?
Yeah. So the first question that he asks is, if the client needs to be aware of you before engaging, what is the best way to ensure that they know you exist? Well, this gets down to, marketing 101, but there's so many different other ways in today's marketplace with technology and social media to be able to make people aware of who you are as a salesperson in the marketplace.
So we have awareness marketing or brand marketing, or we have contact marketing where people are going to call us back and let us know that they have some interest. So the awareness is just that step that says you're a player, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're a player here.
Or I know who you are. I had a good feeling when we talked, and my definition of a salesperson is the one that has the impact on the experience and an influence in the outcome. So there was a pleasant conversation. And then the next step, number 2, is if the client needs to understand what you do, how could you best explain your specialty? So now it gets into a little bit more about the combination of the salesperson and the company, and what area do you focus on? How do you work with your clients and prospects in order to make a difference in their life?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So really
I think also, if we're networking, how can we get somebody quickly to understand what we do without over talking it, right? So we use the elevator pitch. Right. I think they said they don't like that elevator pitch in here somewhere, but we do have to be able to clearly elucidate what we do and intrigue them to want to learn more. And we've all been in networking situations where the guy over talks what he's, let me tell you all about me, and they don't listen to each other. Right. So I think that's a chance to help people understand what you do, and then maybe get an appointment to have a further conversation.
Mm-hmm. And that's all part of the process. You got into step 3, which is the interest. So you kind of alluded to that earlier. Is if the client needs to be working on their priorities, how can you connect your capabilities to their goals? How can you connect with their interest and their priorities? And I think that's really important these days, is to really uncover a prospect's priorities. And it's really overlooked, but I've noticed lately when I focused on what are your priorities, then you're able to put your solution, their problem, into a set of priorities, and you know where you're at right now. And you'll be able to know when your turn is, and creating a solution for them based on their priorities.
That's right. And that's what I call I call that the discovery step, right? I don't know what your interests are. I don't know what your needs are. I don't know what your challenges are. So I need to have a meeting where I can find out what those are and see how we can connect what we do to those interests, those needs, those issues that you have. And too many salespeople go in and they assume that they know what those interests are, and they start telling them about what they have and what they can do, hoping that somewhere in there the customer will jump up and yell, "That's exactly what I need." But they don't. Yeah. So,
well, I mean, you bring up a good point of objections. I mean, if we know what their goal is and we ask great questions, we get all those objections out of the way, then we know that they're not going to come up later and delay or distract us from completing a mission that's important to the prospect.
Yep.
Number 4 is, if client needs to know you are capable of doing the work, how can you ensure them? What will be the ground of respect on which your relationship is built? So we need to be able to move past being liked and really work on earning their respect.
And I think good discovery, good questions, and connected to their issues provides respect. It can say to the customer, to the prospect, this person really knows what they're talking about. They've had some experience here. These questions show me that they know where to take this conversation.
All right, number 5, if a client needs to trust that you have the best interest at heart, how can you build a relationship characterized by trust? And I think that goes along with respect. So those can kind of overlap a little bit. Getting on to number 6, if a client needs the authority to pull the trigger, how can you support them by building an internal case and giving them the ability to engage with you and to make a decision internally? So this is where we really can work on the champions. We can work on the people that have authority. We can work with the people that have the ability to ratify a decision in order to continue.
I think it's also the ability to get the job done. And how you present yourself and the testimonials that you have and your experience then also tell them we have the ability to do this. And that's a big question for customers. You know, it all sounds good, but can you really provide the opportunity when the time comes?
And then lastly, number 7, if a client needs to act when they are ready, how can you make sure you are there when they need your help the most? And that's you have to be present to win.
That's right. And you have to have gone through this whole process in order to get them ready. That's what it's all about, right, Scott? Getting them ready to make the decision so they don't have barriers, which we call objections, that we're going to talk about later. So good, cool.
And it really gets into a lot of details as to how you can use each of those steps. And there's more in that chapter. And I still encourage you to pick up the book and get it on your reading list. So thanks for tuning in on that.
Yeah,
chapter.
I think that's good. What I liked about it is it's kind of the workbook part of this, right? So we've talked about theory, and this is where they've really said, okay, what situation are you in? Where's the client, and how can you use these 7 steps to attract and close better clients? And I think that's really important. So good.
Yeah, good stuff.
All right. And we'll work on chapter 17 next week. So it gives you an extra week to get it. And as Scott said, we'll have a guest the week after that. We want to talk about getting to a decision. I think, some people will call this the close. I don't consider it a close because I don't like closing. It gives the impression that the salesperson's gone and we're going to give it over to somebody else and we wash our hands. And I think good sales teams are always present for a customer. So we want to get them to a decision. And there's a lot of reasons why people don't want to make a decision. They think that by not making a decision, they're saving themselves from a decision. Of course, we know that to not make a decision is a decision, but they don't see it that way. My desk has stuff on it that I haven't made decisions on that just kind of sit in the back of my mind. So it's really good if a professional salesperson can help you move through the process of making a decision and either get to a yes or a no and get this thing completed. I think one of the worst things for salespeople is a sales funnel full of maybes, full of I'm going to do it some days. That shows me that person does not have the ability to get the customer to make a decision. So I've got 3 major points that I want to talk about, Scott, and get your opinion on what we need to do to get to a decision. And I'll just cover those and then we'll go through them in detail. The first one is you got to follow a logical sales process. We talked about that just a minute ago. Number 2, you've got to be ready to close at any time. And number 3, you've got to have some tools to use when they hesitate. So let's talk about a logical sales process. Now, I'm not going to go into what my sales process is. It's not like it's a secret. It's probably a very common sales process. But I think what we need to think about in sales process, Scott, is the customers have things that they need answered. And your sales process has to answer these. And I have 5 questions I think that I want them to know we're going to answer. Number 1, why should I buy from your company? Number 2, is your product the right and best option? Number 3, will you and your company be around to help me? Number 4, can I trust what you are telling me? And number 5, will you make this as painless as possible? If the customer doesn't have those questions answered in their head, they're going to hesitate. So what do you think? Do you have other questions, or are those in line with you?
Those are very profound questions, Bill. I think they're totally relevant to a prospect's fear of change and concern when they make a change. I think you bring up a really good point is, will you be around to help me? Will you put me in a position where I will not, as a prospect, be embarrassed or shamed if I end up getting emotionally involved in this and I get excited about making a purchase, but find out that it's not the right solution? Will you help me fix it and make sure that I don't have any embarrassment internally within the company? And I think that's a big deal some days. And I know one company, you'll never get fired if you buy blue. I mean, that's what IBM's approach was. If you buy from us, you'll never feel embarrassed inside the company because it'll always be the right decision. But great questions.
I think it's a lot more personal when we look at these 5 questions, especially if somebody's making a decision within their company. They've got to be able to say, I'm not going to get fired for this. I'm not going to, as you say, use the word embarrassed. I think it's worse than embarrassment. It's I can lose my job, or I can lose my chance for advancement, or I can be shuttled over to, the head of nothing. And so these can be very important questions, but they really do reflect on what you talked about earlier with that chapter, things like trust and respect, confidence that you're going to be there. And you've got to build those into your sales process. That's why we don't start our sales process with telling them all the great things about us. Those come out a little at a time as they need to, so we don't just sit there and toot our own horn, but we instead find out what their needs are and then drive toward a great solution for them.
Yeah, I think one additional question to consider is that from a prospect's perspective, working with a salesperson is, as a salesperson, do you understand the problems that I have? And if the salesperson doesn't understand the problems that this prospect has, then a solution might not be the right solution. So I think that might be another one to add.
Excellent. All right. So number 2 is be ready to close at any time. And what I mean by this is we don't know when the customer is going to be ready. But I had a friend of mine, Kenny, that I used to work with. And we laughed about Kenny because Kenny talked him into it, talked him out of it, talked him into it, talked him out of it, talked him into it. And whenever Kenny stopped talking, they were either in or out, but it was always a random choice because he never was listening. They could have stood up in the middle of that conversation and said, I want to buy this. And Kenny would have said, no, wait a minute. I'm not done with my presentation. I've got 3 more things, only 2 of which you're interested in, and one which will make you say no to the whole deal. So I think you got to be ready to listen as you're asking questions, as you're moving through this process. The customer can truncate it and say, I'm ready to get going. But one of the ways to help them make this decision and be ready to close is to change the conversation. So many salespeople want to be in control of the system and in control of what's happening. And I think the way to do it is to give them ownership. Quit talking about it as something they're going to buy and start talking to them about how they're using it. Move the conversation past the buying point. Give them control of the process. Allow them to say, don't say, okay, here, the next step of what we need to do is X, Y, Z, but ask them a question. So in your process here, Larry, what's the next thing that we need to do? Where do we go from here, right? And then give them choices. I love to give clients choices, all of which I'm happy to do. Do you want choice A or do you want choice B? Do you want it big or do you want it small? Do you want to start it now or do you want to start it next week? And either of those choices are good for me, but it gives them the feeling that they're in control, which I think you talk about a lot, how important it is for the customer to be in control of the process rather than a salesperson pushing it all on them.
Yeah. I think one point you bring up, I think it's really important, Bill, is when you give them choices, they have to say no to some of the choices. And when people have to say no to something, they're giving it up, which means they no longer get the chance of ever having it. And that scares people, which is why as salespeople, we get so comfortable with, let me think about it, or I'll get back to you. And we go, okay, I got one here. Okay, good. They're interested. No, they're not. They just don't want to be mean to you by saying no. And they don't want to have pressure of giving something up when you as a salesperson have to do that. So it's a great
you've got to force that. You've got to force that decision. I think the other thing is interesting too. I talk to people all the time. They ask me, what do I do when they start to put price pressure on me and say, well, we want a 5% discount, or we want, this. And when you talk about what are they afraid to lose, the question I ask them is, okay, well, that's great. We can take 5% out of this. Which of these benefits do you want to get rid of?
Right. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
one of these, which of these is worth only 5% to you? Well, what do you mean? Well, we didn't just make up this price and have nothing to support it. If you want 5% out of this, it's got to come from somewhere. Do you want it out of service? Do you want it out of timeliness? Do you want it out of quality? Where do you want that 5% to come out of? And that's how you start to negotiate, as if you have something of value, not as if 5% is nothing, because that 5% is pure profit.
Exactly.
You got to learn how to do that. So be ready to close at any time. Listen for that opportunity to close the deal. So listen for when they are ready and they're starting to say, when they start to change the conversation from if we buy to when we buy. When they change the conversation from is this good enough to how do we put this into our production line, or how do we use this on site, or when they change the conversation from should we do this to when should we start doing this, all those are indicators that they're ready to move forward. Quit trying to add new things into it and allow them to buy.
Yeah. Very good advice. And you bring up a lot of points that stress the topic that we covered last week on active listening. If you're not actively listening, then you'll miss some of the stuff that people are telling you.
Because you're on your program to tell.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, these are such great points, Bill. I mean, one thing that you talked about is when they wanted price discount. Sometimes salespeople get another company and that's you're competing against, and that prospect says, well, so-and-so will do it for cheaper. Okay, well, let's take a look at their proposal. And generally it's not apples to apples. And what you need to do as a salesperson is to be able to compare the two and say, well, we offer you a 12-month warranty. There's no warranty in here. Yeah, well, we really believe that that's important, but you're not willing to pay for it.
Right.
Well, and we can't match our price, that lower price, and give you all the value that we offer. So make sure you know what you're comparing your proposal against.
Right. And if and sometimes a customer, you'll say to them in your example, well, let me see their proposal. Oh, no, we can't show you their proposal. Well, then don't play their proposal against me.
Right.
You cannot play their proposal against me and ask me for a price discount if you're not going to show me their proposal. I have to assume then that their proposal is no good and you're just using it to try and get a lower price.
Well, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because that's really what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what they're doing.
Yep. So number 3 is when they hesitate. And we're kind of getting into number 3, which is questions and objections, right? So questions are a buying sign, but there are major objections that have to be dealt with. Now, again, if you have a good process, some of these should be dealt with early on, but price is a big one. We're talking about that. Timing is a big one. When should we do this? Can we get this started? Is it in the budget? That sort of thing. Do I have the authority to make the decision? And then I want to delay. I have to think about it. Those are, to me, the 4 major objections that come up at or near the end of a deal. And a lot of times the customer will hold off on those, knowing that they want to make some kind of objection to those.
And sometimes the delay is a priority too. So there's something else that's more important than what they're looking at to solve the problem that your solution solves. And
right.
That's really uncovering what are their priorities. And I bring that up because that's an objection that I've been getting a lot recently, is what are the priorities of a company? And they're shifting because there's employment issues, there's supply chain issues, and all of a sudden now we've got other priorities to work with. The last thing we need is more revenue or more sales because
we don't know what to do with the sales we have. Yeah, that's right.
And we can't find the supplies to fulfill it.
Yeah.
So it's like, what are the priorities? And the market is just so strange right now.
Yeah, I think the market is very unusual. And again, I do think that 2 factors, not enough people in the workforce right now, and supply chain problems are just nuts. So do we have enough to even bother to sell it? Why should we hire new salespeople or train them when we can't fulfill the orders that we already have? Of course, you and I deal with sales all the time. And this, just an aside here, if you're a salesperson, quit trying to sell the stuff you don't have.
Right.
And exactly. if the only thing that's selling is the stuff customers are asking for, you're not a salesperson. You're just an order taker who's taking the orders and not able to shift them to the things that you do have. So look at that, look at what you do have access to in sales, and try to find the customers that need those things if you're having supply chain problems. I know it's difficult, but it's something you have to deal with. So I think most of these objections, if you know, Scott, these are the 4 major objections, you better start asking questions around these objections early in your process.
Right.
If you're, I always get an objection about price. Well, tell me what you're talking about price on the first day of your conversation. I don't like to talk about price. That's why you get objections about price. You don't want to talk about it. And so you don't bring it up. And because you're told not to talk about money, and now you're going to get caught with it later, because eventually you're going to have to talk about money. You don't want to talk. You get caught on authority all the time. Well, you're not talking about asking the difficult question if this person can really make the decision early in the process, and getting all the people in the room that are part of the decision-making authority. So find out whatever your major hangup is, you're probably not asking questions about it early enough.
And that's what an objection is an unasked question by a salesperson before a proposal or quote or the close to ask for the order.
That's right. All right. I'm going to go through 4 closes that I like that get the sale moving on, get them to a decision. Number 1, I like to make the assumptive close. I like assumption. I don't ask them if they ever want to buy. I just take them to the next step. I start talking about when instead of if, and quite often we're ready to move before the contract's even been signed, and we've been making decisions about who's going to be in the class and when's it going to be, and we've already made all those decisions, and signing the contract is just an afterthought. So I like the assumptive close. Do you use that very much?
I do a little bit, and it's a little bit more of a kind of a commencement to a conversation. So it's like a commencement speech at a university where the students are graduating and now we're moving on to the next step.
Right. We've just skipped it. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. The second one I like is alternate of choice. This means, do you like plan A or do you like plan B? I don't care if they buy plan A or plan B, as long as they buy a plan. So the alternative choice gives the customer a feeling that they're making a decision. Our friend Terry Wu would say you have to have 3 choices.
I agree.
You have to have a high price, a low price, and a middle price. And 90% of the time, they'll take the middle price because that's how people's brains work. So the alternative choice with 3 choices is kind of works into their neuroscience. And if you missed our talk with Terry Wu, look back in our archives, and he's a very good guest, has some really good ideas. But alternative choice is a good one. I like the Ben Franklin close. The Ben Franklin, if you don't know what that is, let's sit down and write a pros and cons. We make a T-chart. One says pros, one says cons. And we start to ask them, why should you buy this? Why shouldn't you go ahead with this? And we let them make the decision, because a lot of times they haven't put down on paper what they like and what they don't like. And so you're just helping them. And again, if they say no, that's fine. If the cons are too high, I'll advise them to say no. But it's just a chance to help them organize their thoughts and put them through a process. And almost always the reasons for going ahead with the deal on the pro side are a lot longer than the reasons for not. But it also brings out some of those cons that are objections that they might not have brought out. It's a good smoke out for objections.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to compare cost against price. And salespeople need to spend more time uncovering cost, consequences, and risk of inaction and prospects doing nothing. And what is it kind of impact is it going to have on a company versus if they buy the solution and write out a check, what kind of impact is it going to have on the company?
Yeah, so how would you introduce that one, that thought?
Say, well, let's look at the pros and cons of what happens if we do nothing and what happens if we do something. So let's just start with that. I mean, are we going to be making a change or not? Is this important enough to make a change or not? So what happens if we just do nothing? Well, we got this. We build up all the costs, consequences, and risk, and we add the element of time into that. And then we look at the opportunities that we're missing because of that, or we look at the expenses that are going to increase because of all of that. And then we monetize it to become a dollar amount. And then we compare that dollar amount to the price of the solution. And the price is obviously lower than the monetized dollar amount of all the cost, consequences, and risk of inaction. The difference is value. Yeah. So very similar to a Ben Franklin close, but comparing the two.
Excellent. Yeah, I think getting it to a numerical value at some point of not doing something is very helpful because they don't think about that. Again, a lot of people think that by not making a decision, they're not making a decision, but we know that they have made a decision to do nothing, and there is a cost to that. So, and then finally, to deal with the delay, I like the tell me no close. And
Mm-hmm.
so what that is they'll this is somebody who's hesitating. I've called them back and they're hesitating and we're going to put it off. And I finally say, Scott, it sounds like you want to tell me no.
Mm. Yeah.
And leave it sit there. Don't fill that void because they've got two choices. Choice one is to go, well, Bill, yeah, I really want to tell you no. Hey, that's okay because at least we've made a decision and I can move on. But if they hesitate or if they say, well, no, I don't want to tell you no, they only have one other choice, don't they, Scott? And
That's to
that's
say
yes.
yes.
That's to say yes. So now you've caused them to make a decision. What do they say? Fish or cut bait, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to fish?
Right.
You're going to sit here cutting bait. So now we're fishing, and now we're going to say, okay, you want to tell me yes? That's great. What's causing you to hesitate? What's
Mm-hmm.
keeping you from well, it's timing or I don't have the finances or whatever. Okay, great. I can deal with a real objection. I can't deal with delaying tactics. So there's a point. The reason I use the tell me no close is just to get them to finish a decision and move forward.
Right, right. And sometimes you can just look at people and just look at the anguish on their face that they know that they have to buy and they know that they have to change, but they just don't want to go through the process. And it's almost like, and for some reason, this thought is coming to mind out of the movie, The Breakup with Vince Vaughn and Jennifer Aniston is, I want you to want to do the dishes. You don't understand. I want you to want to do the dishes. Not, why do I have to do the dishes? No, I want you to want to do the dishes.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what prospects have to do. I want you to want to make a better difference in your life
Yeah.
through this solution.
Yeah. Sometimes we buy because we have to, right? We buy
Mm-hmm.
because we're cornered. And sometimes as a salesperson, your job is to help them get cornered because no decision is not going to help them. They're not going to move forward. If you believe in your product, if you believe in your service, then you've got to believe that their life will be better once they have it. If you don't believe that, you're going to have a real trouble selling. So I'm going to go over those three things again. Have a good logical sales process, be ready to close at any time. And when they hesitate, have good ability to overcome objections and close the deal. So, all right, Scott, I do have a
Very impressive subject, Bill. I'm really impressed with how simple you made this. And I think, hopefully our listeners will listen to this again. There is so much information in this process that Bill covered that can make the whole sales process so much more effective. So this is incredible stuff, Bill. Thanks for
well.
putting it
Thanks,
together.
Scott. Thanks, Scott.
Mhm.
All right. So my resources, I have a blog, Build the Need with Strategic Questioning. And so we'll have a link to that on our show page.
Our golden nugget today is both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought by Napoleon Hill. Some of you might recognize that quote because I know some of you have read Think and Grow Rich. I'm amazed how many people have not read that book. I'll ask them, have you ever read Think and Grow Rich? Who? What?
Yeah.
Think and Grow Rich. No, never heard of it. Oh my goodness. It's a
Well,
profound book.
this isn't a knock on some of our listeners, but some of you out there haven't picked up a book in 10 years.
Yeah.
And you're really limiting your ability to learn. If you don't like reading, get what's the audio? What's the one you use, Scott?
Audible.
Use buy Audible, man. Get on these. There's almost every book on there. Whenever I've suggested a book, the client will go, "Oh yeah, I've got that. I can get that on Audible." So
Yeah.
listen to them. Make your car a rolling university. Let's get back into learning. If you're not doing it, but Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. The key word there is what, Scott?
Think.
Think. Think. Think. That's what he's saying here. Both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought. How you believe, how you think is your biggest limiting factor. We've all run into that, but don't be limited by your own mindset. That's the old glass ceiling, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I've got my own glass ceiling.
Everything that we talked about is going to be at winningatselling.com. So if you're not following Bill and I, LinkedIn, you're not connected with us, send us a LinkedIn invite. We love to know where our listeners are in the world, what types of companies they're working for, what industry they're working in, and it really helps us direct the content that we end up sharing with you. So we're really grateful for LinkedIn invites. Add a note saying, hey, I'm a listener. Thanks for your podcast. I continue to listen to it, and share it with others, please.
All right. Next week, our book club is part 4, chapter 17 on how clients buy. And our topic is setting goals and hitting quotas. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.